So we're on source number 2 of the Rome DBQ packet. And remember, we're looking for ways on how Rome was able to gain or get, consolidate or take, and maintain or keep their powers. So the Second Punic War ends after the Battle of Zama with a Roman victory. Unlike the treaty that ended with the First Punic War, the terms Carthage had to agree with bankrupted the city and made sure that they would never be powerful again. So this source is from Appian, and it is called The Destruction of Carthage. And this is just a little background. The Roman Empire fought 3 wars against the Carthaginian Empire in North Africa called the Punic Wars. The last war ended with the destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE. Appian, who lived in the 2nd century CE, wrote a vivid description of the destruction of the African city led by Scipio. An excerpt from that description is below. I want to highlight a couple of things here. So, the destruction of Carthage was in 146 BCE. Appian, the person that we're going to read from, lived in the 2nd century CE. BCE means before the year 0. CE means after the year 0. 2nd century, we're looking at like the 200s. So technically, he was over 300 years removed from the actual event. He was not there, but he did write a vivid description of what the destruction of the African city looked like. So we're probably thinking he is talking to historians, he's reading firsthand accounts, or maybe he's just making the whole thing up. We have no idea, but he did write about the destruction of Carthage about a couple hundred years after it happened. What we are going to do is we are going to read through the source and highlight, and then we will answer the questions after we finish reading the source. So, after penetrating into the city of Carthage, Scipio, the Roman commander, turned his attention to the citadel, its strongest point, where many people had taken refuge. 3 streets leading from the marketplace to the citadel were lined on both sides with 6-story houses, from which the Romans were pelted. They seized the first houses and used them as a base for attacking the next. From their roofs, they made bridges of planks and beams to cross over to the next. While one battle was in progress on the roofs, another was fought against all corners in the narrow street below. I'm going to highlight a few things here. So, after penetrating or invading the city of Carthage, Scipio turns his attention to the citadel. So Scipio is going to focus on the citadel, which is the strongest point of the city, where many people had taken refuge. Now, I'm going to add a note here, you guys. The people of Carthage were hiding in the citadel, or the area with the best protection. That's what's happening. And then I can see here that they're fighting on the roofs and in the streets below. And I'm just going to make a little highlight there. There's 2 areas that they're fighting on. Everywhere there was groaning and wailing and shouting and agony of every description. Some Carthaginians were killed out of hand, some flung down alive from the roofs to the pavement, and of these some were caught on upright spears or ambers or swords. I'm going to highlight this. These were the ways that the Romans were killing Carthage people, or people of Carthage. So the Romans killed Carthaginians. I think I spelled it wrong. Let's get the R. C-A-R-T-H. There we go. Carthaginians. They either killed them immediately by throwing them off rooftops or impaling them with weapons. We'll go with weapons because there's spears and swords. Okay. Others were seen still living, especially old men, women, and young children who had hidden in the innermost corners of the houses. some of them wounded, some more or less burned and uttering pitiful cries. Still others thrust out and falling from such a height with the stones, timbers, and fire, were torn asunder in all shapes of horror, crushed and mangled. So I'm going to write here, torn asunder. I'm just going to kind of highlight this because this is basically saying people were literally torn apart in the war, which is a very gruesome way to fight a war and a gruesome way to be killed, I would say. Nor was this the end of their miseries, for the street cleaners who were removing the rubbish, aka bodies, with axes, mattocks, and forks, and making the roads passable, tossed the dead and living together into holes in the ground. You guys, dead and living together. People were buried alive. "6 days and nights were consumed in this kind of fighting." I'm going to highlight that right away. 6 days and nights. That's how long this battle supposedly lasted. The soldiers worked in shifts to ensure that they might not be worn out with the toil, slaughter, lack of sleep, and these horrid sights. The city of Carthage, which had flourished for 700 years from its foundation, which had held broad dominion over lands and islands and seas, which had vied with the greatest of empires in its wealth of arms and ships and elephants and money, which had manifested extraordinary courage by resisting a strong enemy and famine for 3 years after its ships had been taken. This city was now being utterly blotted out and destroyed. As Scipio looked on, he is said to have wept and to have openly lamented the enemy's fate. For a long while he remained sunk in thought, reflecting that the fortunes of all cities and peoples and empires, like of those of individuals, must change. Troy had fallen, once so prosperous a city. The empires of the Assyrians and the Medes and the Persians after them had fallen, and so lately the Macedonian Empire, the most brilliant of them all. First of all, I just realized that this is off by a line, so my apologies there. There's a couple things I want to highlight in this last paragraph. So the city of Carthage had flourished. So I'm going to highlight here. So had flourished for 700 years. You guys, flourished means Carthage had been doing well. Carthage had existed for 700 years before Rome comes in and destroys them. It held broad dominion over lands, islands, and seas. It held control, you guys. It held control. I'm going to put this here. Broad dominion is control, all right? So they held control of these areas for 700 years. And it had fought against the greatest of empires. It had extraordinary courage, all right, by making sure that they did not cave. Carthage did not surrender easily. They never gave up. They survived famine for 3 years. The city was completely destroyed. As Scipio looked on, he is said to have wept and to have openly lamented the enemy's fate. This means that he cried and that he openly was like, oh my gosh, what have we done? For a long while, he remained sunk in thought, reflecting on the fortunes. This is where I want to highlight. He reflected that the fortunes of all cities and peoples and empires, like those of individuals, must change. You guys, what Scipio is saying is nothing is permanent. Empires will rise and fall. People will live and die. Everything changes. And then he gives examples of what areas had changed. So, having read and annotated our document here, if you were a Roman citizen reading this description, how might you feel? So I'm not going to answer this for you because this is an opinion statement, but think, if you were Rome and you were reading this like in your history book of look what we did, I want you to tell me how you might feel and why you feel that way. Maybe give me a quote, give me an example or a reason. And the same thing with question 2b. If you were an emperor who was thinking about going to war against Rome, how might you feel about this description? So if I'm thinking, maybe I'm going to go fight against Rome, let's see what they've done in the past, and I read this, how do I feel? Am I feeling confident about war? Am I a little worried? Am I concerned? How do I feel about reading this and then going to attack Rome? Based on Apian's description of the destruction of Carthage, describe one way the Romans increased and consolidated their power. So this, you guys, is pretty obvious. How are they increasing? How are they getting power? Well, Rome defeated Carthage and took the empire's power for itself. How do they consolidate? How do they make sure no other people have power? They consolidated their power by completely destroying Carthage, making sure that no survivors could fight against them in the future. That's what they did, you guys. They wiped out an entire civilization. They wiped out Carthage. They take the empire's power for themselves. They consolidate that power. They take it and they make sure there are no survivors, right? Carthage had existed for 700 years. They had had control over everything and they did not surrender easily. So what happens is, as Apian puts forward, the Romans come in and destroy. They destroy and they take, and it's forever changed. In lines 38 to 43, Scipio, the Roman commander, reflects on the history of great cities and empires. So in your own words, what does he say? Can you think of any other examples to support his claim? I suggest looking at that last comment here to answer this question.